All right. So, Sam, you say you had the day off today. So, what have you been up to?
Really not much. I woke up like around 8 and then just kind of took care of myself. I had a bagel with smoked fish on it, so I was pretty excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's the simple things in life.
That's
And
nice.
yeah, and just this interview.
All right. Fair enough. What do you normally do during the day?
Well, I work a lot, but when I'm home, mostly I'm just trying to relax. I don't feel an urgent need to come home and like kind of continue my labor. I feel like I do plenty of that, so I'm pretty content to just lounge around, spend time with my wife and my dogs, maybe watch some stuff, and then I'm pretty active online as far as just trying to gather more information, learn more things. I'm generally just a curious person. I like learning stuff, so the bulk of my day is just trying to encounter new information, new perspectives.
Makes sense. Thank you. So, what first got you into the typology world?
So it was a few years back. I was pretty unaware of anything in this realm. I was studying biology, and I knew a neuroscience type guy, and he was curious about me. So he asked me, and then from that point, I was interested in it for years. And then eventually I stumbled upon socionics, which I liked because there's more clear definitions from the Socion site. So I was able to go on there and get a better idea versus MBTI, as everyone has an opinion. And that's true in socionics too, but there's a more clear reference material to always go back to.
Makes sense. Thank you. And what do you work in?
I work in the military. I'm in the Navy, and I'm a computer network technician. So basically, make sure that every node is able to communicate with each other and basic troubleshooting and solving problems.
Okay, thank you. So, was it your desire first to join the military or first to become a technician?
I joined the military for very pragmatic reasons. Because initially I was studying biology and I was going to grad school, and then I had a lot of you could just to summarize it, complications in life, and then I ended up not completing. So at that point, shortly after I met my wife, and then we weren't financially stable. So now I'm able to send her to school, which was really big for me, and just kind of stabilize us as far as housing and healthcare. So within that, initially, I wanted to be a nuclear technician, but I was too old for that. So I was suggested by my recruiter to try this pipeline, and it's a good fit for me because I think getting out, I'll be able to align with well compensated jobs. So like that again, it was all very pragmatic.
Okay, fair enough. What do you most enjoy about being a technician for the military, for the Navy?
I like the aspect of kind of just solving the problems, but also that requires a lot of kind of troubleshooting with the group, because I'm not going to know everything, and sometimes I'm going to miss basic problems, and likewise for the other technicians I work with. So quite a bit, there's times where I need to kind of touch base with other people, and then as a group we find some sort of solution or plan to implement, and that part I do enjoy. Is the not just the aspect of solving the problems like by myself, but also kind of as a group we get more intelligent and more capable, and it does feel good to solve a problem that was pre-existing.
What sorts of things do you least like about your job?
It's definitely hours, because in the military you have duty. So we are either in 3-section or 6-section. So that means that every 3 days or every 6 days I sleep on the ship. I don't get to come home. I don't get to see my wife and my dogs. I don't really particularly have internet. And then when we go underway or on deployment, we're gone for long periods of time. It's theoretically it's not too bad when you join, but then once you're like before you join, but then once you're in, it is a different reality. And so I'm happy to serve at this point in my life, but also I don't plan to do like 20 years and try and get retirement out of it. It's not my plan. But I'll try and do well because I'm here.
Yeah,
that is the hardest part, is just being away from home so much. I've talked to people with like children. We don't have any children yet, and for them it's really hard because they feel like they're constantly missing out on the little things for their kids' development.
Yeah, it's certainly hard, that. And okay, so if you're not looking at, sticking with it 20 years and going to retirement, what would you be thinking of lining up after?
So there's two paths that I've been interested in generally. I still have 3 more years of active duty service obligation. The one is actually a commissioning program, because I did come in with a degree, so I'm able to commission as an officer when I choose, if a program will accept me. So there's a clinical psychology program that I applied to that came up short last year. So I'm contemplating whether I'll put in another application for that this year. Other than that, I'd probably get out and do either something military contracting as a civilian, or if I could find something that's not attached to the public sector, that's totally on the private sector, I wouldn't mind doing that. So probably something similar, computer networking. Any major organization is going to require that, but I'm not super passionate about it. But I do enjoy solving problems, and I think it's balancing your interests with being able to provide for your family is incredibly important. So I need to make sure, like, first and foremost, I can take care of my family, and then secondarily, I'll worry about what it is I enjoy. Because before I met my wife, I wasn't I wasn't responsible for anyone. So I could just kind of chase my interests. And that's what I did the first 25 years of my life. And so I've kind of grown from that.
What was some of that chasing?
I didn't really understand, as you get older, you realize how different people are from you and how different you are from other people. So part of that was just whatever I found interesting, I'm going to spend all my time like looking into that, researching that, figuring out more about that. I'm generally very curious, so just asking a lot of questions. If I had any professors that had any projects that I was interested in, I was digging my nails into that. And so I was almost completely guided by just curiosity and interest. And that carried me pretty far in life until, I didn't have a plan. And then things got difficult when things got hard. So I learned to kind of become a little bit more solid and pragmatic in my way of going about, life.
Makes sense. What sorts of ideas have really captured your interest?
Almost always they're very philosophical ideas, which sounds a little I don't know, I can't think of the term, but I feel like every single question always resolves back to like this kind of very fundamental question about determinism versus free will, and about ourselves as the perceiver. So I've gotten interested not so much just in the external world, but how I react to it and how other people react to it. And I would say that what I have grown to find the most interesting in general is just people, basic psychology, because if you thought about any complex system like a car or a computer or a road system or anything, you could think of a people or even groups of people as systems, and they're fascinating and complex. And so I end up putting a lot of my mental inventory there.
Fair enough. What is it about seeing people as systems, groups of people as systems, that appeals to you?
I think that on a basic human level, we're just generally kind of interested in people. We might just be like basic programming. We're kind of designed to be interested in people because those are the other organisms that we're going to have to interact with the most. So there's that on that basic biological level. I think that the interest is there. I think as a generally curious person that's drawn towards kind of complex things, on my level, I'm drawn there. But then also on the level of like focusing on what in life could go wrong. Almost always, it's not just like people outside. Like, I'm not trying to play the victim here and be like other people are going to destroy my life. That could be the case, but also you can destroy your own life just fine. So interest in people and why people do things has been very beneficial for me to help navigate. So it's kind of maybe a morbid mix of things.
Okay, thank you. So what qualities do you admire in other people but do not have yourself?
That I don't personally possess?
Yes.
I admire people with a lot of soft people skills. So my wife is a good example. I have another friend that's a really good example, and they can generally foster goodwill. They might, where I feel like I step in with them is that they can struggle with being a little bit more direct and just cutting right to the core of something. That's where they tend to rely on me a lot. But I think in general that they're able to generally foster goodwill among others, and they're not being fake in order to do it. That's something I really appreciate. I can also appreciate when people take on a lot of responsibility and they're not blaming other people for everything. They're saying, what is my role in it and what can I do and what can I contribute? But I feel like that's deviating away from the question because that's something that I try and personally foster in myself and I don't feel particularly inept at.
Right. So you take a lot of responsibility on, but you're also a bit direct and you like the softer skills in others.
Yeah, I think that also this too. I know somebody who matches the second criteria where he does take on a lot of responsibility, but he's just simple. He doesn't worry about all the big things in life, all these big questions. He's just living a very reasonable life where it's just him and his wife. And he just kind of he goes home and he works on his house. Yeah, he's like pretty content with that. But he's also a very intelligent, smart guy. I really, really respect him. So,
all right.
And he's generally nobody's problem. He's generally always a positive to the situation because of that responsibility he takes on, and he's not confrontational. Good guy.
Do you have many friends?
I kind of struggle with the term a little bit because I don't really know how to qualify, what makes a friend and what doesn't. So I would say that, yes, I do. And I have a good, easy time coming into a new situation, kind of identifying which people I click with and gravitating towards them. So it's not super hard for me, but ultimately the vast majority of people I'm going to just be acquaintances with because we can't really get too close. Our spheres of interest are, quite a bit different, and I have a hard time adapting. So, but I can be generally like I work with on the ship about 300 other people, and I get along decently with most of them. So it's fine. But I struggle to keep up friendships when I move to a new location. I have a hard time just reaching out, and it's not weird for me then when I do. It's just I kind of don't. I'm willing to pick up where we left off.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. In which situations are you at your most confident?
So this is also another difficult question for me because, and it might just be my issue with the concept of confidence. I think that in Western society in particular, confidence is generally overstated as a value. And I think it's important to be uncertain, and it's important to like critically reflect and come to your conclusion by trying that idea multiple times and challenging your ideas. And so confidence is a thing that I think is earned not just because of a thing that you just generally possess. At least that's how I experience it. And so I spend a lot of time assessing other people. And so when I come to a conclusion about how somebody's conducting themselves, I tend to have some level of confidence in that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So when you say you spend a lot of time assessing other people, what are the things that you're looking at?
I'm generally looking at how they act around others, how they act around me. And then I'm also looking a lot at what they say, because I think that whatever somebody says reveals a lot, not necessarily about like just their basic state that we all are somewhat cued into, but it reveals something about a motivational level underneath. And so by picking apart what somebody says, maybe not to their face, because I've learned that that's rude, but by analyzing what they say and kind of picking it apart, you can learn a lot about somebody. Just their choice of words, how they say them.
How have you utilized that in the past?
In general, kind of two different ways. So I might challenge somebody if, depending on what they say, if I generally disagree with it. I view that as like an important thing that we do for each other, is that if I say something like totally out of bounds or ridiculous or thoughtless, inconsiderate, selfish, I kind of expect somebody else to challenge me, and I expect myself to challenge others. And when I think that somebody is not going to be receptive to that and they're going to double down, then generally I create distance, because I can't work with you. So if it was in the sphere of work, then I'm going to just, at that point, we're just talking on a professional level. There is no camaraderie. There's no friendship. I don't want to be around you. For me, it's pretty simple. And then, so it's not only informing, how I interact with them, but it's also informing whether or not I do interact with them.
Fair enough. What sorts of things tend to piss you off about people?
In general, just entitlement and selfishness. There's this, because there's a level of hypocrisy in entitlement alone, is what I've observed. Because if I believe that I should receive better treatment than other people, and you can imagine for a second that you're the other person, you wouldn't like that. So you're like, you can only be entitled if you lack any sort of ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes, because if you did, you'd see how hypocritical that is. So I, in general, have a hard time with that. And that's one of the ways that I might challenge somebody, is like, they're like, this person sucks, but I'm trying to get them to see it from maybe the other person's perspective, or see how they're being unfair. So those are the sorts of things that I'm really bothered by. Are I see that like a lack of knowledge, a lack of competency that can be corrected, but a lack of consideration is harder to correct.
Thank you. What brings you joy in life?
So another thing I struggle with, not joy in general, but I don't think of it as I go and I do this because it brings me joy. I think that joy is a thing that just happens. So I might just be hanging out with a friend, and we have this moment and I'm enjoying this. Or I eat this bagel that I talked about earlier and I enjoy this. So there's all these little things in life that whether I'm consciously choosing them or they just kind of vicariously occur, that I'm brought joy. So it's not a thing that I go hunting for. I think it's just a thing that happens. And if you're resistant to the possibility that that can occur, then you're probably going to focus maybe a little bit more on doing things that bring you joy. Like I don't particularly like going to work, but I would be lying if I said I didn't go to work and I have moments of joy. Doesn't mean wouldn't say I enjoy work as a whole, but I definitely can find enjoyment just about anywhere in little moments.
Thank you. So we talked a bit about you being a bit direct with people. What causes that directness?
I think that directness without any sort of tact is not beneficial. I think that trying to moderate yourself to a social environment and producing some sort of tact in your statement is very important. At the same time, I think that a lot of times that because of like our social conventions, our rules, whether they're explicit or implicit, means that we can't cut through to the truth of the matter, at least what I perceive to be the truth of the matter. And so I'd rather just kind of get it out there and just say, hey, like, I don't like this. This is bothering me. This is not okay. Or, sometimes it's actually quite positive, I find that for men, we're often limited. Maybe there's more of a US thing, but from affirming each other. But, hey, I really liked that you did this, or that was like a very nice thing that you did. So I find that we can be both positive and negative validators of each other. And we can also try and critically understand something without tying the idea of that thing to ourselves. And so I feel like the directness goes hand in hand with my curiosity and also desire to, see the social condition improved around me, you could say. I don't want to work around people I can't, and be around people I can't like tolerate, because I always keep my mouth closed.
How much do you apply your analysis of others to your analysis of yourself?
A lot. Yeah. I would say the first, I wasn't even aware of like an internal state until I really reached my mid-20s, because it was, the world is this vast place full of information, full of curiosities. And so I was mostly focused on other people. Of course, I tried to conduct myself well, but I wasn't super aware of like this idea of like a subconscious or an unconscious. So if you ask me like, who are you? This would not have been a complex question. 10 years ago, it would have been something I could not answer. And so at some point, I was able to really begin to reflect in my mid-20s and realize that, there's a lot underneath, and there's a lot to investigate, and it's harder to even understand than what's external. And I came to appreciate that all these ways in which I thought I was acting out of volition, a lot of times were very, very deterministic in nature. And I started to understand that about other people. So I would say I really started focusing, like when I was younger, I'd focus on what was fair. And then I wasn't really concerned on the why, or why somebody might struggle with that. And it wasn't until I started to do that heavy investigation into myself that I really started to do that into others.
Thank you. So it sounds to me as though from a young age, the external world was a great source of curiosity to you and something which you involved yourself in getting to grips with, but the internal eluded you until later.
Yeah. So like if you had asked me, why are you happy when you experience this? You appear happy. Why are you happy when you experience this? I would have been like, I just enjoy it. I'm just happy, or I might have been very curious and racked my brain for days about that. And whereas now I could probably sit there and do some level of analysis and try and give you an answer, whether or not that's accurate.
what caused you to dedicate a good amount of time, it seems, to that internal exploration? Why do it?
So if I had to think about any sort of, again, system, so like a car, a computer, anything really, I am also a system, but I'm the only system that I have to interact with all the time. And so you could say there's a utilitarian kind of approach blended in there. So in general, like the curiosity kind of gets paired to, what, and I would say my curiosity is not like always blended with utility, because at one point I spent weeks interested in Genghis Khan and, and the Mongol Empire. What did that do for my life? But I would say, like, from a utilitarian based approach, like I am the system that I have to live with all the time that interacts with everything else. And so it's really hard to understand anything fundamentally about reality without understanding how the processor of that reality operates.
Thank you.
Is this helpful, or is this?
No, I think it is helpful. Okay. I think it is helpful. Why did you think it might not be helpful?
Maybe the way I'm answering could be like kind of confounding.
Why do you think it's confounding?
Because I'm not going down a singular path towards an answer. I might be kind of splitting it open a bunch of different ways every single time you ask a question. I'm not giving you, as much as I appreciate clarity and directness, I'm not giving you much clarity and directness.
That's okay. I haven't given you a questionnaire to write little answers, little boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, let me see. How do you handle situations of confrontation and conflict?
I don't particularly like it. I'd rather we all just kind of got along. Like I said, I'm happy to serve. I'm happy to do my job in the military. I understand that there are moral implications involved with that. I think also in an ideal world, there is no militaries. I'd like to see that an ideal world exists where we all just kind of got along. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever see that. It's very improbable. So I can get scared. I don't want to necessarily like fight anyone. I'd rather find some sort of resolution. So while I like challenging somebody, I like challenging, but I don't like it being open conflict, which a lot of times I think in the people that I challenge, there struggles to be a difference observed.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I feel like somebody's going to be overly confrontational, I might just, and I don't want that, I might just minimize contact with that person because I'm not trying to do that. But if I can kind of smooth things over in an acceptable way where we come to a common understanding, I'll try that too.
Fair enough.
But I don't live for conflict or anything. I don't need that to feel good in life.
Sure. How do you go about learning new things?
So I've broken learning down into two approximate processes, which is explicit and implicit learning. So explicit learning is like I have a test. So it's in this textbook and it's in these chapters. So I'm going to read these. I'm going to download the information, and I'm going to try and understand some of the connections in there, and then I'm going to produce that knowledge and be assessed on that. So that's generally explicit learning. That's what's valued in school systems. But children, like babies, are not tested, but they learn way faster than adults. So I've kind of come to understand that just learning by interacting with information for me is a lot better. I understand that, like, for my job, I'm constantly assessed for like getting a qualification, or my ability to show that I know how to do some sort of procedure. So explicit learning has its place and it's valuable, but I think that it's important that we don't cast out implicit learning. And for me, the more information I can just kind of passively interact with, be interested in, go down those paths, maybe even down that rabbit hole, and come to a deeper understanding of and understand the connections of that information to other pieces of information, the better.
Thank you. How easy is it for you to change your mind?
I suppose it depends on what I'm changing my mind about. I'd like to think I'm easygoing at that. My wife might disagree, so I can't imagine that my desire to be very good at changing my mind and my capacity to do so are one and the same. So if I'm generally wrong about something, like I get the information, I can kind of adapt and make sense out of it. I don't feel any strong need to be right in a procedural basis. At the same time, if I am like on that, you could say on the ethical side of things, if I feel something, even if it's an unpleasant emotion, so I'm feeling anger or sadness, somebody might want me to feel something different, which is to say that you're wrong about the emotion that you're experiencing. I pretty strongly protest to that because I want to feel the way I want to feel until I can process it and then come to my own conclusion. I don't want any assistance in that regard. So that's where I might be a little bit more stubborn. But my wife is generally good at shepherding me around. Like if I'm resistant to go to some sort of social event, she'll somehow find a way to get me there. And then, before I know it, maybe I'm having a good time.
How does she do that?
I don't know. She's one of the, some people are just generally likable human beings where 99 out of 100 people are going to like them. I think for most people, if 70% of people liked us, like that's to 70 to 50% of people liked us, that's about normal. She's just a person that everyone seems to like and fosters goodwill, and I guess I'm no different. I like my wife. She's a good person, and she has a good positive disposition, and she can kind of bring life into an environment.
Okay. Let's see. For you to be fully fulfilled in a role, what would it need to have for you?
In the world?
In the world, in a role, whatever it is.
Did you say world? Role?
Could be the world. I said role, but world applies equally.
I mean, they're two very different answers. I can answer both for you, though.
Sure, answer both.
All right. So in the world, that would be like we all have this idea of how the world should be. And yeah, we tend to think that the world would be a lot better if it was, to our understanding, our vision of it, our just our general idea of it. It's pretty unrealistic because the world isn't going to be. So you kind of have to set aside your idealism a little bit. I'm a pretty strongly idealistic person, but I also suffer for that because like the world isn't going to match your vision. And so it is important to temper idealism with some pragmatism about like, this is unlikely to occur. So what can I do? That's also why I appreciate the technician I work with that just does his work, goes home and has a normal, reasonable family life. I don't think he's burdened by these idealistic kind of visions in the same way. So I think that the answer to that would be it's important to temper yourself rather than temper the world.
So when it comes to an idealistic vision, what's an example of that?
I think in general, just people having more consideration for those around them would be really important. Uh, Sometimes it's very small things, like, barring some sort of physical disability or injury or deficit of some kind, like putting away your shopping cart. Like, if you don't put that away, somebody else has to do that. That's a very small example, but I see it as indicative of some larger problem, that I can get ahead, or I don't have to do the labor because somebody else will do it. There's this lack of consideration for others and a general entitlement towards yourself that, I think, diminishes us as a people. And the more that we understand that we are all just human beings, there's a common human level. Of course, there's hierarchies. Somebody is going to be more competent and should fulfill this role. Maybe we should incentivize people, let's say, earning more money because they do this job that not many people can fill. Sure, but let's say I was a billionaire. Like, what would I do with billions of dollars? I would just want to help people because I would understand I'm in a very privileged sort of position to help other people. And so I don't take any joy in being ahead of other people. And I try not to take any particular sorrow in being behind anyone else. Does that answer the question?
It sounds to me that rather than being an outcome that you are pursuing, it's more about the standards of human decency and behavior and expectations of that, and reconciling yourself to some degree that not everyone's going to behave the way that's expected. Is that right of me to say?
Yeah, because I think that the outcome would just follow the principle. So if people in general were more considerate towards others, I think that the world would be a better place. It wouldn't, you could say, okay, we all, like, let's say we all have the same amount of compensation for the same amount of labor, right? That would be totally fair, you
Yeah.
could say, in some sense. And then others might say it's unfair in a different sense, but and that removes all these class inequalities. It wouldn't change the fact that people still, like, we've tried this as an experiment, and people still want to get ahead. People still want to be in the privileged position. So it's always going to return to some sort of divide. You haven't solved the root problem, which is that people don't care that you're also another human being that carries your own value, or they care, but they just don't care that much because in their mind, they're above you. They deserve better. They are more than you.
Yeah.
And that there's something about that drives me particularly mad, because it's not the way that I live my life, and I don't really appreciate when I see anybody else living their life that way.
Yeah, it goes back to the entitlement.
Yeah, it really does every time.
Yeah.
And then to answer your question about a role, I could see myself in a role where I, let's say, am enjoying what I'm doing. I get to, like, for role, you mean like a job, or just like a general life?
Yeah, a job. It could be a job. It could be just the main activity of your life.
All right. So the way I see it is, like, let's say I got the career I wanted. I could live in the place I want and have the kind of family I wanted and have the impact I wanted. So like a general, like, life vision of everything going perfectly would be, having enough money to send my wife to grad school and to help her facilitate the career she wanted, for us to be able to provide, well enough for our future children, and to be able to pursue the activities I find interesting, to live in a place that we wanted. For me, that would probably be like Pacific Northwest in the woods. So like maybe like Oregon or something like that, or it could be even in the Appalachians or in some other country, but living in the woods on some amount of property, and having a job where I'm able to generally help other people and kind of help in the environment, foster goodwill. So,
all right,
dedicate a lot of time to my family and the development of my children.
All right, Sam. I think I've got a good idea what type I think you are.
Okay.
I think. Am I right in saying people were trying to type you as IEE on Discord?
No. EII.
EII they were typing you as. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I would flip it. I would totally flip it. I think Delta makes sense, but I'd actually be interested in exploring LSE as a typing for you.
Oh. Okay.
And the reason why is because I see someone talking to you, someone who takes on responsibility. Yes, you draw a contrast between life before you had anyone else in it, where you were interested in learning and pursuing your curiosity, right? But even then, I identify someone who's very serious about getting to grips with the information, exploring things, exploring yourself, exploring the world, because at the end of the day, you want to create good systems where you are part of that system and you want things to work well. But then once your wife entered your life, there's a question, okay, now I need to be responsible for more than just myself. And there's a willingness there to more, even than your curiosity, is to take on the full responsibility of your remit to do that well. There's a very earnest quality there. What was very interesting to me is when we were talking about, reflections of yourself and how actually you oriented initially towards the external before the internal. And that to me is the key thing that differentiates between EIIs and LSEs. The EII is born of the internal. The LSE is a type that goes on the journey. They start in the external and they learn to connect more with the internal over time. They see people through their actions. They see themselves through their actions. What are the facts? What has occurred? But to see the inner potential, to see where is someone meant to go, is to see the intentions behind the actions. That is something which they're very interested in, but also not confident in unraveling, except through the empirical. They need almost a sense of, I wouldn't quite say spiritual insight, but almost an in-depth, almost intuitive insight into people and why we're doing what we're doing. What is our intentions? Am I a good person and good in my intentions at the end of the day? I do think that Delta makes a lot of sense in terms of how you've looked at, okay, there's people who are entitled, and really the best way to react to things is almost stoic. Look at how I can work upon myself rather than look to just have an impact on the world and almost be grandiose in love oneself in one's impact on the world. I can see the very clear delta beta divide there. But yeah, I didn't see any kind of doubt in you of competence. If anything, I see a very competent and skills oriented person who then, is trying to grapple with things that go beyond the practical towards the almost spiritual and psychological, because they are all things which, at the end of the day, if understood properly, help to grease the cogs of the machine.
Yeah, you could say that. And then the general agreement with the previous typings was heavily in delta values.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think in terms of LSE, I can also go into, let me think. I think the sensory aspects are also clear. You're someone who is naturally direct. You like people who can actually, find more indirect approaches to things. You also told me how, you want to be someone who can change their mind quite easily and be open, and you want to embrace almost the uncertainty of things. But the sense that, in a situation where you can be a bit direct, a bit almost assertive in situation, not because you like conflict, because that's almost a sort of go-to way of dealing with situations, and that the growth has been for you to open up more, to be more curious, to be more interested in a range of different perspectives. And go on.
I was going to say, so one thing that changed a lot in my life, and why I made those distinctions between earlier and later in life, is because I've learned a lot in the past 30 years. So I was going to say, I used to want, and I used to feel like it was a defeat if I could not change somebody's mind right then and there. So if I would tell somebody something, hey, you're being ridiculous, you're being unfair. It didn't make sense to me when they would double down.
Yep.
Like why are you doubling down? You're wrong. And I just couldn't fathom it. And now I realize that there's a utility in just saying your piece and then walking away. And that took me a really, really, really long time to realize the concept of planting a seed in somebody's mind.
Yeah.
I didn't comprehend that. And now I do. I rely on that a lot.
It's almost the logical pile driver approach was like the first iteration of Sam. And then later on, there's the, okay, how can I open up and think and find what are the more indirect ways of actually reaching the person's soul in this? And it's in EII, they don't have that. For them, they don't understand the idea of needing to really change someone's mind. You know, I am who I am. You have your own view. I'll be interested in learning and understanding your view, but I have no interest in changing your point of view. It's, you know, you are you, and if you don't have, and if you have views which are terrible, I'll think worse of you. But I don't need to, the idea of I need to go and impact on the world to make the change. That's something which an EII doesn't have to learn that lesson. That you need to be the best of yourself rather than having to impact all the time. It's the LSC who learns the lesson of initially being very much about the impact and seeing that to moving more towards intentions and doing the self work. And it's why the LSE is what we call an asking type rather than declaring type. They're the one that goes on a sort of journey. The key thing is though is that in order to do what the EII does or wants to do, they do need the practicality and the skills and the ability to connect intentions with practice that the LSE brings.
So would that also explain the my wife will point out I also often miss cues, which you could say is more of a neurodivergence thing, but setting that aside because right now we're just talking about socionics.
Yeah.
That it's taken me a lot longer to really understand people. Like usually like the first 20, 25 years just being generally baffled by human behavior. Whereas now I can kind of go, oh, that makes sense. Because there's this, with people, there's this illogical logic. Like, so what I might have said before is that makes no sense. And then I realized it makes no sense to say that makes no sense because they just did it. So it makes sense to them on some level. That's something that like I turned a few corners where I was able to kind of break through and start to understand other people, their motivation, their intentions.
Yeah, exactly. It's moving from what you can see and how that doesn't make rational sense empirically to different perspective and ways of seeing. That's an any growth. It's also, I think what I found interesting was how you describe, those good people in your life, such as your wife, and how they are likable by the vast majority of people. And it's about sort of spreading that sort of goodwill. And I could see in that, and you look more to the behaviors again, but you're trying to reach for the person's intentions behind the behaviors. That the intentions is more important to you than how they're coming across. But almost the way you described it was, okay, I'm not very good at directly interpreting the intentions, so I'll look at the behaviors, which is something which I see with LSEs, where their role functions extroverted ethics. They have an idea of how people are meant to come across. They have some way of knowing, okay, I need to be polite here, etc. But what they are really interested in and seek affirmation in is the reading of character, both their own character and other people's characters. Who is someone at the end of the day underneath all the action? And as a result, it's about making those value judgments and being confident in those value judgments that they find out is ultimately rewarding.
Okay. I'm kind of excited to also share this with the Discord group that I chat with.
Sure.
I think it'll open up a lot of conversation. I am also comfortable with you sharing this.
All right. Good. I'll gladly make it public then.
Okay.
I think the last other thing, the sensory side, I said, you take a lot on your shoulders. There's lots of activity implicit to what you do, which is the extroverted sensation in the demonstrative. I was asking about the conflict side. You're a guy who can handle and finish a conflict, but you don't like the conflict environment. You'd rather there's a better way of dealing with things. And then, when you're talking about experience and rather than going out to have a fun experience, which is more of a sort of extroverted ethics sort of thing, it's more that in those moments, you're able to just connect and find the joy there in the little things. And I can see the introverted sensing is there. It's there in you. It's not the big thing, but it's there in your ego block, I think. It doesn't seem hard won. It seems like something which is an area of, regular practice.
Yeah. So I think that I've dismissed it in the past is because like my idea of comfort might be doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to like the general definitions of SI and a higher placement is to, you build the structure so that you see it and then it can offer you additional comfort. For me, that might be going home and doing absolutely nothing because reducing the amount of effort that I'm making is enjoyable.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty content to just kind of reduce, like when I'm at work, I'm there to work, to do my job. There's no sense of me going somewhere that's not my house and not getting something done. But as soon as I go home, like that's out the window because I'm home now. And so I'm not trying to do additional labor. So I'm not the most organized. Usually the definition has to go with a highly organized individual. I'm pretty content to be a little bit disorganized, especially at home, and just not doing too much unless it becomes a necessity.
Yeah. Basically, the sensation is very adaptive in an LSE. So it depends on the situation. They'll be as intense. They'll take on the intensity that's needed for them to get things done, and then they'll put in their rest time. And it's not pushed onto their surroundings. It's not about trying to perfectly balance the harmony of experience. It's finding little moments when they are there. It's chillaxing. It's not being so organized and structured. Plus, the LSE is a type which prefers a pragmatic approach to the structure for the sake of structure anyway. Like they don't like set structures because they're all about learning how the structure doesn't work and how it can then be improved, but improved by more experience. So yeah, it's not about that perfect organization of a harmonized experience, which you find a bit more with introverted sensing, where it's in a mobilizing function. It's like, this is the thing I need to do to prove to myself I am in the moment. And it's especially apparent when there's also introverted logic, which isn't the focus. And I didn't really pick up much focus on that. I mean, sure, you said systems, but it sounds to be the systems are really processes functioning in harmony together.
So I actually haven't spent too much time considering like a high TE placement lead. Like what would be the large differentiator in what you've observed with me between introverted logic and extroverted logic?
Yeah, the key thing is that introverted logic is what we call a priori knowledge in philosophy, and extroverted logic is a posteriori. Is the knowledge, is the approach to truth one of factually informed experience? Right? Are we observing? Are we testing? Are we seeing how it works? Are we continuously gathering data to improve how it works and testing and finding out the facts on that? Or is it about forming some kind of structure which sets out what the truth is, and that structure is meant to be unchanging because it's meant to be the truth in its full coherence and consistency? I didn't really capture an ethos from you, except that more a set of attitudes that people should not be entitled. That in practical wisdom, you should look on how you can change and develop yourself. But there isn't necessarily a code of axioms there. It's more about what you can do to learn, improve, and grow. and approaching that with the right attitudes, which is more of the introverted ethics. So the logic is pragmatic, not ideological.
So the one is probably pragmatic. The one, like you could say, code I run at the core of everything, which is for me very important. And so it is born of utility. Is I've discovered in life I can be very wrong about things. I can be very wrong about my conclusions, whether they're like in the logical or the ethical sphere, and there's danger to that. So there's this Socratic system of thought of the only thing I know is that I know nothing, which I've kind of adapted to. That it is that there's only one thing I will be certain of, and that's that I will be uncertain of everything else, because there's an inherent risk to holding with certainty onto some particular piece of information and saying, this is it. What happens when you're wrong? You're just going to go, no, this is it. And I don't want to run that risk in my life anymore.
There's also a thing, and adding to that with LSEs, that they take a fundamentally negativistic approach to truth. They are not about finding certainty. They are anti-certainty fundamentally. They are about, okay, it depends. What is true depends on situation. There is no absolute truth. Instead, it's, do you have the wisdom from enough experiences to know how to do things in different situations? Are you informed? Are you aware of all the nuances, all the ways in which this particular rule doesn't actually apply? And how can you be willing to actually change your point of view as new information comes in? So I think that aligns pretty well. LSEs and IEs both, they much reject the absolutist truth model.
Okay. Yeah, this has been a lot to think about. I really hadn't considered it too much. I think I made the general leap that because I'm very much an idea-oriented person and I'm very introspective, that something with, and I tend to generate many different paths to go down, that I was any ego, which maybe
I see the NE. I do see the NE. It's just the chronology of it, really. It's, I can see the NE. I can see the NE also coming also out of a sort of more direct approach, like a sort of instinctive go-to. But the NE is almost a motivator for you for self-growth, which makes sense as a mobilizing function. There's also a certain tension, and speaking about it a bit before about being idealistic and, realizing that some things actually can't be changed. And there's a common thing for LSE. They initially overstate the locus of control over their environment. They can start thinking almost anything is up to them to be able to work hard enough, to put enough effort, to take on enough responsibility in order to make the change, in order to do things better. And what they then sometimes find is that some things just aren't going to be changeable. Some things will always turn out a certain way. And that inevitability is almost alien to them. They always think, well, aren't there more possibilities? What if I account for this? What if I account for this? What if I try hard at this and I think across this possibility and that possibility? And
oh, sorry.
go on.
So it reminds me of this conversation I had with my wife this one time, and it's very impractical, but I realized, and I told her, that if you always said the perfect thing and did the perfect thing, so like if you could live infinite iterations and you did something a little bit different in each one, that any outcome would be possible. You'd be president. You could be in the job that you want. You could make this thing revolution over here happen. There's this perfect way you could conduct yourself. Just we can't know that perfect resolution of behaviors, of actions, of words, of tones. So there's this understanding of that, and there is this point of grievance when you do have to take a step back. You can't affect what you want to affect in the way that you want to affect it.
That's it. That is the implicit hubris. Every type has an air of hubris. That is the LSE's hubris, that anything is possible if you just work hard enough. And what they struggle especially is with the idea of some kind of spiritual destiny or fate that is not grounded in any evidence they can see. They're told it's just going to happen, and no matter what they do, they can't stop it.
So where I do think that is relevant is I came to understand, and like it's the best way I can think of to resolve the divide between free will and determinism, is that from my perspective, I have free will. I make choices. I can say this to you, I can say that to you. But if I had to be honest about it, maybe I was 70% more likely to say this, and I was 30% more likely to say this. But from a perspective of an all-knowing, omniscient being, like you could say it's God, or it's some AI or some aliens or something. They already know exactly what I'm going to do. My fate is determined, but I don't sit within that perspective, so I can't.
Yeah,
all I can do is speculate.
There's also, I think, there's evidence to suggest that, if anything, free will is part of the illusion of our consciousness, and that really our bodies react to things that happen, and our consciousness is only told of how we've reacted after the fact, and us going through the process of forming and making our decision. That all happens actually chronologically after we've already acted.
Yeah, like if I had to be honest about it, I think that we do follow a more deterministic model. We just don't experience it that way.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
That's something that people typically don't want to be shared to them. I found people like to think that they have their volition, they make their choices. But what I also have found is that the people that tend to think that they are making their own choices, they tend to do better. They don't fall into the same kind of nihilistic trap. So while I do think that it may be more accurate to say that we may be more deterministic than we think, I think there's more utility in saying that it's maybe you should believe that you have free will.
Yeah,
like those things can be true.
Yeah, I'd say people who people who have a higher locus of self-control, a high locus of control, tend to be happier people, I would say, and they tend to accomplish more than people who have a very low locus of control, who are then more likely to blame whatever happens to them on other people. And yeah, that is the flip side. IEIs can lean towards the low locus of control. If you look at, say, the work of, say, Karl Marx, the philosophy is very much, where is the personal agency and responsibility? It's always not in the philosophy. Which, yeah, I find it interesting how certain types can lean into different locus of control, but there's no perfect way. One has its advantage, the other one has its advantage.
It's very, very interesting, because yeah, I've it can be hard to know if you have correctly typed IEIs, or even INFJs, in MBTI. But I've run into people that don't really take a lot of accountability for themselves on the emotional sphere, like, you made me do this kind of mentality, and I'm just allergic to it, and I cannot stand it.
Yeah,
it's like every part of my being wants to chastise them for just being like, do you understand you're responsible for things that like, ultimately at the end of the day, I'm me and you're you. And so, like, I didn't reach into your brain and make you feel anything. Like, it's your feelings. Like, you have to take some responsibility. Now I can influence your feelings, certainly, but I don't make you feel. There's a distinction here that you're simply not getting. So
yeah. All right. Well, Sam, it's been a pleasure. Yeah, I say, with permission, I happily make this public. And yeah, I look forward to speaking again at our follow-up session.
All right. Yeah, I'll arrange that with you over email, I guess, because I'm about to go on vacation. So
where are you going?
Oh, I'm gonna visit my parents in California. So I'm excited about that. I have about 10 days. So
all right, enjoy.
All right. You have a good day.
Same to you. Bye-bye.